Hi everyone, this is Marie from Tea with Marie and Everything British. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some tips and tricks to making scones or scones, depending on how you pronounce it. So the first thing I would say is that if you find a scone recipe that works for you, I wouldn't mess around too much if you're making it in a different flavor, because you can use the same basic scone recipe and then just add different flavorings to that recipe. That's what we do pretty much all the time. But there's a couple of things to remember about that. So if you are adding anything that's wet, like fruits, preserves, anything like that, make sure that you put in less liquid than you would do normally. Because you can't use the same amount of liquid and then put something that's wet in the mix. So for instance, when we make blueberry scones, we'll put a lot less fluid in, a lot less buttermilk. In our case, most of our scones have a buttermilk liquid in them. And then also, if you're using dried fruit, you need to mixture a little bit wetter because the dried fruit will soak up the liquid. So one really important thing to remember when making scones is cold, 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 cold. You need to keep everything as cold as possible. Now, we make scones in 2-pound batches. That's 2 pounds of flour. So most of you would only probably do half of that. I get 16 good-sized scones out of 2 pounds of flour. So what I do is I measure the flour and the dry ingredients, which in our recipe are flour, a little bit of salt, baking powder, and sugar. Put those in a bowl, cover it, and just leave that in the fridge overnight. I then refrigerate the butter and then grate the butter on the largest grater, the largest cutter part. And then I put that on a plate, cover it in wrap, and put that in the freezer. So those two things can be done the day before, at least that's how I do them. So when it comes to then making the scones on the day, I add the butter to the dry mixture, and you don't need to work it in too much because it's grated, so it's sort of small pieces anyway. In fact, to get the best rise and the best crumble on your scone, it's really good to have a few larger pieces of butter in the mix. So don't overwork it. Then I add the wet ingredients, which in my case, with my basic scone recipe, it's eggs, buttermilk, and I always put a little bit of vanilla in. So the eggs and the buttermilk are always in the fridge, so I whisk all that up and it's sort of ready to go. So some of the most popular scones we make are the raisin scones, which are the typical British scones. You know, when you see people serving afternoon tea in England, it's usually a raisin scone, which we also call fruit scones, or it's a plain scone. We, however, in Tea with Marie, because the American taste likes a lot of selection, offer a number of different flavors. So I've had great fun sort of playing around with some of the different ideas. So what we make is a white chocolate and raspberry scone. So in that situation, I would cut down on the sugar a little bit, use the white chocolate chips. Then for me, I make that mixture up then and cut them and then put raspberries on the top. Now there's a reason I do that. One of the main reason I do that is that it's important in my business that presentation and the pictures that I take are really good, because that's how you see, that's how you purchase from me, is from the picture. If I was to put the raspberries in to the mixture rather than placing them on the top, it's going to make the mixture kind of yucky, reddy, pinky color. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you don't mind how the scone is going to look and the mixture of the color, you know, in the case of blueberry scones, it's, you know, doesn't look good, I don't think. But the other thing in putting fruit, especially like raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, always use it frozen. So I literally will make the scone and then push frozen raspberries into the top of the cut out scone piece. And that works really well. So everything being cold is very important. Now there's a few things to mention when you're mixing the fluid, or the liquid, I should say, into the dry mix. And that's that you don't overwork it. So when making scones, super important, everything cold, don't overhandle, don't overwork. So we've worked in the butter a little bit, not very much, because it's already cut in, being, you know, cut into small pieces. And we've put in the liquid. I put in half the liquid. I use a fork to stir that around. I don't use a food processor. I think it just mixes it. It just makes it handled too much. So I use a fork and then put in a little bit more. So you want your mixture to be, you want a few crumbs left in the bowl. It needs to be able to stick together, but not be soggy. That's really important. If your mixture is too wet, they're just going to spread out. So you're going to have to make it a few times. If you've not made scones before, there's a sort of touch to it. And sometimes you just have to try that a few times until you find out exactly what it's meant to be. It's very difficult to explain. But once you've got the mixture to all stick together, I usually literally knead it like 5 or 6 times just to make sure that everything's mixed. And then I form it into a bowl, into a kind of bowl, and use a rolling pin just to roll it out about 1 inch thick. In my case, that's the size that we make them. And then cut those with a cutter. Or a lot of people like to just make it into a round and then cut it into like you were cutting a cake almost, so that the scones are triangle shape. But I like to make them the traditional way. A few things that are important here. First of all, it's really important that you've warmed the oven to the temperature that is needed. The scones tend to cook in a very warm oven. I usually put them in at 400 degrees. And once again, the amount of time that they need to cook seems to change a lot based on so many different things. So I will always put them in for 10 minutes and then have a look and see how they are, and then try another 5 minutes and see how that looks. And then in some cases it needs another 5 minutes. In some cases it just needs another couple of minutes. One of the ways to check, you can just push down gently on the top, and you can usually feel if it's started, if it's set, or if it's not set. You can use a toothpick, a wooden toothpick, to put in and make sure that no goo sort of comes out of it. And another way, if you just get an oven glove and turn the scone upside down and tap it on the top, if it's got a hollow sound, that usually means that it's cooked. So those are important things. Now, in terms of making a head, there's a few things that you can do. And I have tried all these. So one way is to make the dough up and then leave it overnight in the refrigerator. Now, my personal experience is that that has not worked as well as I would like it to work. And I'll tell you why. Because they start to rise. And then when you take it out and start rolling it the next day, you kind of pushing out the air that needs to be in there for them to, you know, to be nice and high and soft. What I have done is roll them out, cut them, and then put that in the freezer, uncooked. And honestly, you take that out whenever you need to use it and let it defrost for maybe 10 minutes, not so that it gets room temperature, because you want it to be a little cool too. And then just bake it like that, and you would not know the difference between that and cutting them and putting them straight in the oven. Leave them to cool. I like to use a cooling rack. And then you're all set to go with your scones. As far as keeping them, keep them in an airtight container. They'll keep for 2-3 days like that, or wrapped in saran wrap. And then if you're going to keep them for longer than that, I would just freeze them. You can freeze them cooked, but personally, I have found that they dry out a little bit. It's better to freeze them uncooked and then just bake them when you need them. That's my preference. So anyway, this is once again Tea with Marie and Everything British. My name's Marie Hope. Consider myself the expert in everything tea and afternoon tea related. You can see our website at itsteawithmarie.com. That's ITSTEAWITHMARIE.com. You can find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called Tea with Marie Chat. Our Instagram is at It's Tea with Marie. So once again, thanks for joining me. Bye.